Okay, well, I think it's a good time for us to get started. Again, this is the closing webinar for the online discussion forum on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas in preparation for COP15. Thank you all so much for your engagement and active participation in this forum. And with this, we will have as you all know, the forum ended, but basically closed last night, midnight at least Eastern time. And we had a lot of productive inputs and discussion, which was very interesting and useful to follow. So now we're just going to wrap up a bit and have some final time and opportunities for some discussion amongst the group after we have a little bit of a recap from our co-facilitator, Janos. But first, I'd like to pass off to our esteemed Substa chair, Mr. Hesikio Benitez Diaz, for some opening remarks. Please, Hesikio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe. Colleagues and distinguished delegates, we now reach the closing of the online discussion forum on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, the famous EBSAs, in preparation for the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I wish to thank you for your robust engagement in this discussion. Despite our physical distance from each other, we indeed held a full discussion with 177 posts across all 4 threads. We were pleased to see not only your strong engagement, but also the constructive nature of your inputs. We focus indirectly on many areas that have been proving contentious in previous discussions on this issue. We're also pleased to see that many posts clearly outlined rationales for various perspectives on this issue, which is the key to build mutual understanding and working towards consensus. The discussions raised views on useful elements to be considered for incorporation into the COP15 decision, but also areas of different views that the COP will need to address on these issues. The Secretariat will have a difficult task before it of producing the report of the forum discussions, which will be provided to COP15, inform its deliberations on these issues. Remember that we have no mandate to negotiate or to craft language. As we know, these issues have been under discussion for a long time, which has hindered the EBSAs process to evolve and continue to provide up-to-date information to inform planning, research, and management. With the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework soon upon us, the need for robust information on special places in the ocean becomes even more essential. The post-2020 framework will require increased efforts to reach heightened ambition. And parties and relevant organizations will need sound information through the EBSAs to inform these implementation efforts. This outlines the importance of advancing our work on EBSAs. I'd like once again to thank to our colleagues, Mari-May Muzungales from Seychelles and Janos Hennicke from Germany, and the colleagues from the Secretariat of CBD for your kind and active support in this process during these days. We will hear from Janos some preliminary views about your rich participation and valuable inputs. Again, I offer you my sincere thanks for helping us to fulfill the mandate of Substa Recommendation 2410 by advancing discussions on these key issues. But we were unable to do so at the physical meeting of Substa 24 in Geneva. Your valuable input will help to provide a strong basis for discussions by the COP and hopefully a resolution on these issues. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to our co-facilitator, Janos Hennicke. Janos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Thank you very much for these kind words, and also many thanks to the Secretariat. I'm really glad to be here today, and let me start by passing on the best regards from Mary May. Unfortunately, she's not available, and yes, please accept her apologies for not being here today. I will do my best to cover basically her and my tasks here. And what we will do now has been outlined already from Joe and Ezekiel briefly, that we'll go quickly over some of the main points of this webinar. And at the end, of course, there's time for questions. If there are any questions or additional comments, we are happy to add a discussion at the end of this meeting. So next slide, please, or first slide, please. Yes. This is SBSTTA recommendation 2024-10. As you all know, that is the basis, the foundation for all our discussions for this forum, and also for the following discussions at COP15. And you all know we have outlined it in the opening webinar. There are several points in it which are under discussion and which have to be solved. And hopefully this online discussion forum brought us further or closer to finding compromises and to come up with a revised recommendation for then a decision at COP15. Slide, please. Right here. Yes, this is just basically picking up again what we actually have been involved in here now during the last week. The online discussion forum, a new type of work for the marine issues at SBSTTA. What we want to do is exchange views on the on the recommended elements, which will then go into COP15. These are the participants. We have gone through it. You have received the list as well. You have exchanged with these colleagues in discussion forum, and it's great to have so many interested people here in this forum. Slide, please. And just again, as a recollection, the focus of the discussions were to exchange views. It was not negotiations. Ezekiel has made this clear, and judging from the posts of all of you, this was also clear to all of you. And thank you very much for keeping the spirit with respect to not going too much into detail of the text, because we cannot provide here new text elements. We don't have the mandate for it. And so the outcome or the output will be a report. Joe has mentioned it. A report which will summarize the key elements of the discussions. We will go into some first views a little bit later in this webinar. And as we've already outlined as well, this report will be made available to COP15 to inform about this forum, to inform about our deliberations, and to support to come up with a sound and robust and accepted COP decision on EBSAs. Slide, please. We had quite a few threads. This was really great to see, and thank you very much to all of you that we got so many interesting and valuable posts on the different threads. As you can see here, how it was split up. Main recommendations is leading by 61 threads posts, sorry, and in total 177. This is really enormous. Thank you very much for that. And of course, you will understand that this will take time to analyze it, to look at it. So when we go into the different threads, just in a few slides, please be aware that this is not the final, digestion or the final outcome of the forum. We will need some more time to, analyze all your different posts. Slide, please. Right. I've been mentioning it. That's what we're going to do. We will give you some general ideas, some example of views raised in each thread, also some general ideas or general points that were made in various threads. And please note, what we show here now is not consensus-based. What we show here now is not including all the things which have been posted. So if you don't find your post now in this little presentation, don't be afraid. The chance is very high that it will be picked up and you will find it in one way or the other in the report. Next slide, please. Right. Okay. Let's start with the general points. Once again, 170 threats, 77 threats are in it, and what we've tried is to come up with a general overview of the main points which have been made. It's not comprehensive of all the views, and once again, it's not consensus-based. One important thing which we can state, and I'm happy about that actually, is that the importance of resolving these issues of the EBSA process has been generally acknowledged. And I think this shows the spirit that we want to move on with the EBSA process, that from a general point of view, we see the merit in the EBSA process. And I think this is a very good foundation for the further discussions at COP, that we are all going or want to go in one direction. We want to come up with a sound decision at COP15. I will not go into all the different bullet points in particular or in detail, but the general points I would like to just give you some background information. One important point was also made, the link between EBSAs and target number 3 of the GBF in the headline indicators and monitoring framework, and of course in the substudy agenda item 6, marine and coastal biodiversity program. So there is a link, we all know that, and that should be somehow be referenced. The link should be made that it's clear to understand how EBSAs can actually provide information or support for the GBF. Another important point was raised several times in various threats is IPLCs and their knowledge, and participatory approach was outlined. We need to include IPLCs in the EBSA process. This has been made clear. This is a very important issue. And the next one, also an important issue, is IPBES. We all know about IPBES, very important body or very important process. And of course, it would make sense to use the language here, that we can harmonize the language being used in the various union processes. Another point which we would like to make is the how to use the information mechanism to facilitate sharing of information among efforts related to EBSAs. So of course, there's much more behind an EBSA than just a scientific description of a biodiversity hotspots, for example, but there's more to it. There's how to receive funding to come up with these information in the first place, whether or not World Heritage Sites can play a role, and of course, how to develop the state of the marine environment within the EBSA reporting or an EBSA assessment. And of course, we have had the workshops in the past, but we all know now, and we've seen that it works during COVID-19 pandemic, that in-person workshops is certainly not the only way to take things forward, and this should be recognized. And we should look for alternatives, online meetings, hybrid meetings, things like that. And this should be also reflected in the different annexes at the relevant spots. Of course, giving due consideration with respect to time zones and internet connectivity. We all know, some people of you know it more than others at the moment because it's in the middle of their night. And special thanks to them that they are awake and can follow our discussions here. And the last point, last but not least, it seems that it's necessary to provide a clear understanding of EBSAs and what their value actually is for various purposes, rather than, only outlining or stressing that it is an exercise in scientific descriptions. There's more to EBSAs. We'll come to that in the different threads, and yeah, we should bring this across in our further discussions on the recommendation or slash the decision. Now what we will do is go into the different threads briefly. So next slide, please. Thread number 1, preamble paragraphs and paragraphs 1 to 5 of the introduction to the annexes. Same is true as for all threads and for the general statements. No consensus, not comprehensive. Please keep this in mind. A very important point, which was made several times, was on the sovereignty and sovereign rights and jurisdictions of states. This certainly has to be acknowledged. And once again, we have covered this, the contribution to EBSAs with respect to Article 3 of the GBF. I've outlined this in the general descriptions. In thread 1, so in the preamble paragraphs and things like that, we should make reference to other COP decisions, UNCLOS, UNGA, and processes, similar processes. And of course, the BBNJ process should also be mentioned. One important point, and we cannot stress this strongly enough, is that EBSAs do not mean that there's any management going on and any measures should be taken or activities, regulations should be implemented. It is simply a scientific exercise. Nevertheless, we already acknowledge that there's more to it, and we have to make this transparent, but not with respect to management. There's not any management involved in EBSAs. One interesting comments were made with respect to the histories of EBSAs, and I think this is we think this is an important point. So it's listed here actually in 2 bullet points. Joe has given a nice overview where EBSAs actually originated from and what the idea behind EBSA was. And I think it's very important to always keep this in mind, to go back where we're coming from, to be able to see where should we go in the future. So the definition histories of EBSAs are very important, should be mentioned. And of course, then we can or should also look at regional gaps and stress the need for further scientific and technical cooperation. The informal advisory group was also mentioned several times, and there were different views on that, but certainly it becomes clear that we have to deal with this with the advisory group. What's their role? What's their mandate? We have to extend it or make it clearer. This certainly is something we have to look at. At COP. And then I've mentioned it already. We need to describe EBSAs in the future. What can be their role? Maybe one comment on that. Please remember that EBSAs can be many things, and EBSAs will be what the parties to CBD will make it. So we have also a responsibility to use what we've achieved so far and bring it further and use it in the best way. And something like this should be mentioned in the upcoming recommendation or the revised recommendation or this decision of COP15. And last but not least, explore options for further strengthening the exchange of information, how this should all work. There are many research projects all over the world which do not necessarily know from each other, and it would be nice to have some kind of, better exchange, let's put it this way, between, the generating of scientific data in the different parts of the world, and of course how this can feed into the EBSA process. So this was thread 1. Let's have a look at thread 2. Next slide, please. This was annexes 1 to 2, or only 1 and 2. Relatively well, concise. What was or what is in it, and once again, I think we have mentioned it, and we'll get into that also at thread 3 and 4. The difference, or the both options, let's put it this way, of the EBSA repository and the information sharing mechanism. We'll go to this in thread 3 and 4. But one thing is important about both of them, that they give credibility to the EBSA process. This is something we have to keep in mind. Even we sometimes forget, let's put it this way, what EBSAs mean, where they're coming from. We've mentioned it, that they're not management areas, MPAs or anything like it. So we have to be transparent. What is actually an EBSA? What can we do with it? What is in the description of the EBSA? And both ways of providing information, the repository and the information sharing mechanism, are important because this makes us credible. We've heard about the IPLCs and that they have to be incorporated. Once again, we need strong science behind it, strong knowledge bases for the EBSA work. Another thing we must not forget is the regional or even global dimensions of marine and coastal ecosystems. As we know, the oceans have no boundaries, they have no frontiers, and what we do in one part of the world will affect in one way or the other marine areas in distant other parts of the world. So we have to keep this in mind. Another thing is also with respect to getting people engaged in the process, relevant organizations, experts, and of course, once again, IPLCs have to be involved. And then we come to the bit I've already mentioned, the separate pathways. We've also had this discussion, or at least some questions on it, in the opening webinar. In theory, there's the option, or there can be, it could be a good compromise option that we have the two routes, let's put it this way, between EBSAs which go into the repository and go through a CBD process of substandard COP, or through a national process which then goes into the information sharing mechanism. One thing, please keep in mind, this is it's a proposal, but it's it makes it offers for us a solution which we, I think, should all consider carefully because we have to make progress, and maybe this is a way out of the pickle, that there's these two things and there are maybe very strong points, opposing views that we cannot overcome, and maybe this compromise option might help to overcome the issue with AB&J EBSAs, COP, Substar, and national processes, and sovereign countries wanting to have control, understandably, of their national EBSAs. And last point, that we need to see what actually then is in the repository and information sharing mechanism. How does it actually look in EBSA? This is something we also have to consider. Let's move on to thread 3. Here we go. A few points. One, an additional reason for reanalysis or for modification of an existing EBSA might be that different techniques or technologies have been used or were used for describing this EBSA. So if things like this technical issues arise or change, develop further, this might be a reason to modify an EBSA. There was, or this point was made several times, that there was general opposition to the need to mention maritime boundary disputes. This is certainly a very difficult point for, or would be a difficult point for CBD to include, because it's well, the EBSA process is a scientific exercise, not a political one, as we've outlined now many times. We all realize, of course, that political issues play a role in these things, and we should all be aware of that. But with boundaries and disputes, it seems from a general point of view that this should not be mentioned, because it would open up very many questions of what is a dispute anyways, and we will get into waters where the EBSA process might not have or will not have answers to and cannot deal with. Once again, next bullet, the wish to continue the work on EBSA and A, B, and J. Very importantly, this is where EBSAs actually come from. We've heard it in the presentation of Joe in the opening webinar. And then the discussion on the two paths, which will also be mentioned in thread number 4. So there's basically this compromise option that we have one path going or leading into the repository, which would then require the consideration of SBSTTA and COP, and the other path, which will lead into the information sharing mechanism, which would be provided as information to SBSTTA and COP, but not go through the SBSTTA process with a decision or welcoming on that. But a very important point has been made, that these two paths would be equally valid. So they're not two different types or qualities of EBSAs then, because of course the criteria for EBSAs will be the same. And of course we all know it will be, no matter what path will be chosen, if we come up with this or follow this idea, there will be a scientific process behind it based on these EBSA criteria. So there's these two paths, wherever this EBSA then is in the end, the EBSAs will be equally valid, no quality difference. Please keep this in mind also for COP. And then there was a question or discussion going on whether or not proposals or modification of EBSAs should be open for public comment, and whether this is a requirement or if only requested by a proponent. This is something we have to look into. This was a relatively new point. So yeah, let's discuss that, how this, if we wish that should go forward, we have to really look very thoroughly in how this could be done, because it's very many ramifications on who can, who can't, who should propose, and things like that. And of course, the importance of reflecting changes consistently through the annexes. This is understood when we change something, especially since thread 3 and 4, so modification and new EBSAs are very similar in the language. We have to make sure that in all annexes, same wording is used, and all the things which we add to one paragraph on modification is reflected in an analogous way in the description of new EBSAs, for example, just to give an example. And now we come to the last thread, number 4. Next slide, please. Yes, here we go. Well, first bullet, yes. Can we change the order, or it's a possible way to, or it's possible to change the order of the annexes to have description first? We can discuss it. Surely, maybe at one point, it's a matter of taste, whether we look first at modifications and then new EBSAs, or the other way around, whatever is more, whatever preferred. We will see if we have time to discuss that at the at COP. Again, informal advisory group, we've mentioned that, yes, we have to look at this. What is their mandate? What is their role? And once more, the two pathways, as in thread number 3, I've mentioned it. Please have a look at that and think about it, if this would be a feasible option, a feasible compromise to solve this issue. And one thing also with respect to the information sharing mechanism which was made specifically in thread 4 was that the pathway to the information sharing mechanism allows individual parties to have more control over their EBSAs, over the EBSAs in their national jurisdiction. Yes, as I said, these two options, or the EBSAs and the two pathways, would be, have the same, equally valid and have the same quality. So this might be something interesting for countries or parties which want to have a stronger control over their EBSAs in the national jurisdiction. And then a few points more, which we have covered. Workshops, can we have online virtual workshops? Very good point. We should look into that. And also, like in thread 3, proposals open for public comment is an option. Please remember, we have to then think it through, think it all the way to the end. What does this mean? How can this be implemented from a procedural point of view? Easy to say we do this, and then we don't know actually how to do it when it comes up. So we have to look at this as well at COP. And last but not least, and it's nice that this is the last bullet actually. Once more, please be aware that it's important that we ensure that the EBSA description process is and continues to be a robust scientific process. This is where it comes from. This is always the foundation for all the EBSA work. And with that, I would like to close the information on the threads. And I think now we have time for, no, we have the next steps. Yes, so the next steps. Next slide, please. Right. You've heard it. We will, or the Secretariat and us will prepare the forum outcome, a report. And this report will capture, of course, background, context, and objectives of the forum, and then the summary of the points raised in the forum, including, of course, opening, closing webinars. And you've seen, just a brief insight into, well, the first ideas of a summary, the different threads we've discussed, the different bullets. There will be more. Some bits might have been missing. We haven't looked at detail, analyzed all of it, but we will do so. And then, of course, this report will be made available as information document for COP15. So also the interested people which have not been participating in this webinar or this online discussion forum will have access to the report and can see what we've done here. And hopefully learn something from it and get some good ideas what we've discussed here. And with that, I would like to thank once more everyone for their posts, for their comments, and I hand over to Joe for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Janos. Actually, I'm going to hand it back to you as the co-facilitator to moderate the discussion. But and one thing I also wanted to note, now that I have the floor, is there was a number of points in the forum raised regarding the outcomes of the Northeast Atlantic Regional EBSA workshop, which was held in 2019. God, it feels like ages ago by now. And that the outcomes of that workshop have not yet been considered by COP and should be included in the draft decision. This indeed is true. The reason that it wasn't addressed in this forum and in this forum in particular is because this forum was tasked with dealing with the outcomes of SBSTA 24. Actually, the outcomes of that workshop were already dealt with by SBSTA at its 23rd meeting. So the outcomes of that workshop as part of the SBSTA 23, draft recommendation will go directly to COP in addition to the SBSTA 24 recommendation. So it's not forgotten. It's just coming from a different meeting of SBSTA that was outside of the scope of this forum. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And yes, back to me. And now I give the floor to any questions. If you have any questions or further comments, please, the floor is yours. Raise your hand, the little electronic hand. Okay. Don't see anyone. I hope I can see them, or there's one. Yes, Sophie, please go ahead. Please switch on your camera if you're interviewing.
Hi, yes, I can do it this time. Last time I couldn't switch on my camera. Good afternoon or morning or evening, dear colleagues. And first of all, thanks again to the Secretariat and the what are you, facilitator or chairs, or what can we call you, as well as for the many vibrant discussions. I think that this was a very, very lively and very active forum, and I'm really happy about that. Because we are thinking of next steps, and because you definitely don't want me to repeat things that I've already said, I was just wondering, following a conversation that we've had on the forum between, I would say, maybe Belgium, South Africa, and others who picked up on what we had been saying, where we all agreed that the solution we came up with wasn't going to win any beauty contests, but that in order to find some kind of order in the chaos that we've created, that probably some quite strong IT skills were required, or some creativity with graphics, etc. So not looking for any solutions at this point, obviously, but is this something that the Secretariat feels they are equipped with at this moment to deal with those ideas, or is this something that we need to take into account for COP, that we might need to look at what we need in order to get that that sort of creative graphics idea to be put into reality? So basically, I'm going to speak in without any, I'm going to be very direct. Do we need to think about a budgetary impact for such a more complicated IT structure than simply a map on a website, which would be a static thing, where here we're talking about layers and colors, and I'm completely ignorant in these things. So just to prepare us for, if we get to that solution, is this something that we need to be prepared, that we need to work a little bit through a little bit more, rather than just mentioning it how we've sort of agreed it in the annexes right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I hand over directly back to Joe. You have the answer.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I have the answer per se, but indeed, this is a really important consideration, and this is something that we have wrestled with before at the expert workshop that was held in 2020. That at least in terms of the implications, if the options that are being discussed, in particular with respect to two pathways and having maps, or having a map that reflects two types of EBSAs. All of those have different levels of IT requirements. Thus far, all of the EBSA work has been funded by extra, we call it extra budgetary resources, basically donor. It's not coming from the core budget of the CBD. It's coming from generous donors, and it's certainly likely that will continue. So we can't, and any of these kinds of requirements, we certainly don't expect would come into the core budget of the Secretary. That's certainly not something that we would. This kind of work is not done that way, and it would then fall to donor countries to increase their support for this kind of work. We also do understand. I mean, one issue that we have wrestled with as well, with respect to some of the national EBSAs, and the EBSAs in particular that are either refined or developed by national processes. Those do often tend to be of quite very small and often have a lot of granularity, which does require certain levels of bandwidth and all of these technical requirements that would increase the costs for the Secretariat. So those are things to take into consideration about, you know, how we're reflecting national areas and small granular areas with a lot of heterogeneity. So indeed, I think it's not something that necessarily would affect the budget discussions at the COP, but it is something to consider with respect to actually implementing these solutions and the expectations, let's so to speak, that would fall on generous donors to actually make this work happen. Because if we don't have, if the visualization aspect, if that aspect of the modalities is an important part to the process, an important part to actually having everyone on all the parties feel comfortable, then really we can't proceed unless we have that in place. So I think that will then, you know, the sort of the technical aspects of the EBSA website will become a much higher priority in terms of funding for EBSAs and EBSA related work. So yeah, those things amongst others, including increased staff time that may need to come into play with respect to managing these different types of processes and scenarios. So all of these would lead us to, in the Secretariat, to come back with puppy dog eyes to our generous donors and hope that they can continue to be generous with these new requirements. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I see, Ezekiel, you have switched on your camera. Do you want to add something? No? All right. Thank you. But there's a new hand from Elva Escobar. Please, Elva, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Janos. Thank you, everyone. I think it was an excellent exercise. And I only wonder, how can the UN Ocean Decade merge efforts with the CBD, for instance, in acquiring better information from, for instance, data from the seafloor, data from currents, data from the biodiversity. We have all these programs that are ongoing, the 2030 Seafloor Initiative, the 2030 Marine Biodiversity or Marine Life Program. How can they merge and support at some point this description of EBSAs and update them, or provide further information for those needing it? It's just a question if there has been any exchange, interaction with the UN Ocean Decade for that purpose.
Thank you, Elva. Very, very good question. Many different facets to it. Maybe I hand over to, or give the floor to Joe, especially with respect to how the Secretariat, the CBD Secretariat, has probably been made links and has connections already in this respect.
Sure. Yes, indeed, we do have good relationships and connections with our colleagues at IOC UNESCO, who are coordinating the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Many of the more recent discussions we've had with them are in the context of opportunities for the decade to provide support for things like the monitoring framework and indicators for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. With respect to how that can interact and overlap with EBSAs, there's lots of opportunities there. We were also part of the advisory group for the development of the decade, and in that respect, we have provided input through that work with in terms of advising as to how EBSAs could work into the selection process for decade actions. As you know, they have decade, they have a what are they called? Decade endorsed actions. So we did advise that EBSAs could be a consideration or a factor or a factor for, let's say, selecting or giving that kind of recognition to actions. But I think one thing for us to remember is also that, you know, EBSAs is first that we in the Secretariat are quite resource limited and resource, I think more so resource from our time and people. We're quite a small team and we do engage in a lot of different processes. And in that regard, EBSAs are bigger than just the Secretariat and bigger than just our discussions with other entities. So I would say to that point, to that really valuable point, that yes, there probably are very many opportunities and lots that can be gleaned there and taken advantage of, and we urge and encourage all that are involved in EBSAs or interested in EBSAs to take forward those opportunities. I think we do have, for example, like we can look at some of our colleagues who have been in this forum and shared their experiences of how they in their own countries have taken the EBSA work that was done under the context of the CBD and ran with it within their national jurisdiction and refined their EBSAs and used it for management. And that's exactly the kind of work that we like to see. We like to have people, and parties and governments and organizations basically, using the EBSAs for their own purpose, whether or not we in the Secretariat are involved at all. Frankly, it's bigger than us in the CBD and us in the Secretariat. So please, if anybody is involved in the Ocean Decade or has endorsed decade actions or is in the process for that, we encourage anyone to take advantage of these connections and interlinkages. And I do also see that my colleague Ward Appletons from IOC UNESCO has made a very valid point, of course, that IOC UNESCO and the OBIS, the Ocean Biogeographic Information System, has provided a valuable source of data for lots of the EBSA workshops, basically all of the EBSA workshops, I think, and also in that regard is related to a number of the decade programs. So there's lots of opportunities there. It's just taking advantage of all of them, or at least some of them. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And yes, they have also some comments in the chat. So I see Ward Appletons has been referred to by Joe, but there's a question from Lim I Geig, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce the name correctly. Do you want to raise your question in the forum, please? Malaysia, can you hear me? Okay. He has a problem with his microphone. So let's have a look at the chat. I simply read out what the question is, and I'm afraid, Joe, this is also something for you. I hope you can give us some information on the financial sustainability of the EBSA work, and if Jeff can support the Secretariat.
Well, it's a little bit tricky because I think we have to remember that Jeff is we're also waiting a little bit beyond my area of work here, but Jeff is the funding mechanism for the convention among other purposes, which means that the money from Jeff is supposed to be directed to actually the countries and organizations to implement the things that are done in the CBD. So it's a little bit difficult and a little bit of some ways a conflict of interest for us to be getting Jeff money when they're supposed to be funding things that are decided under the Secretariat, and we are supposed to be supporting those things that they're funding. So really, at least in terms of the institutional and legal dynamic of how we relate with the Jeff, it's not really intended to direct funding to the Secretariat for these kinds of purposes, but it is a great avenue and it is a great funding source to actually support the use of EBSA information by countries within their waters or at the regional level. But I do want to say that, I mean, with respect to what I was saying earlier about the donor funding, extra budgetary funding, basically the vast majority of work under the Secretariat is conducted that way. So to say that it is dependent on donors, basically almost all of the substantive work that we do at the Secretariat is dependent on donors in some way or another. The core budget is really for the core functioning of the Secretariat. So let's say, this goes for all of the different aspects of work that we do. It's all coming from from donor funds, from whether it's been the Japan Biodiversity Funds or the European Commission or generous donors like the Republic of Korea or Sweden for different purposes. But it has been relatively I don't want to say dependable, but some degree dependable model, because when decisions are taken at the COP, it is made clear, and although it's not part of the core budget discussions, it is made clear that there are all of these extra budgetary needs that are coming out of these COP decisions. So the kinds of things that we're talking about here do increase the needs with respect to EBSAs. What that does mean, though, is that we may have to, and this goes also for Secretariat time as well, is that we then have to prioritize. We have to see where the financial needs really are and where we need to prioritize our funding requests. So it's certainly not that it's not. I don't want to say, and I don't mean to imply that it's not a sustainable model, because it is the model by which we do most of our work at the Secretariat. It just does require prioritization. So I think prioritization for the Secretariat and for the parties to tell us whether we want to be prioritized, because we have to remember that the post-2020 framework will have lots of more work coming from it, lots of other processes that we're engaging in, and there's only so much time and resources that we have, and resources probably time is the more rare resource rather than the financial situation at the Secretariat with respect to these kinds of activities. So I think the prioritization of our efforts is just as, in our time, is I think just as much a constraint as the financial resources are. So I think it's likely, just to wrap up, then it's likely that this kind of funding model, donor-based, funding will continue, and we certainly, with the dynamic that we have and how we function that way in the Secretariat, we are not donor driven. We do make it clear that our directions and our work comes from the mandates from the Conference of the Parties, and there's no compromise in terms of how we actually execute those responsibilities. But that is the model by which we would likely continue this kind of work and support for this work.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for your answer. Yes. Okay. Thank you for explaining it so clearly. Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any more questions in the chat. I cannot see any hands, any raised hands. So I assume, oh, there's one. Oh, yes. Ezekiel now, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've been listening to the exchange of views, and I hope with this feedback we can go to the COP and streamline a nice decision from the Conference of the Parties on EBSAs, recognizing that it's a very important contribution of CBD to the planet on documenting EBSAs, to have clarity in how we can update information on EBSAs. This opened the door for cooperation with relevant initiatives that are providing information to enhance the quality of the information, have clarity in the process to update, have clarity in the process to include new EBSAs, to provide information relevant for decision making. This has been a long process in our conventions, a good contribution to everybody. I hope we can ensure to continue working in this process to get better and better information using the different platforms. Of course, there will be needs on information, on capacity building, on technologies. Joe explained the way that the place in the Secretariat can be improved through some donations and mentions of financial mechanisms like the JEF that applies to eligible parties, that they should submit their own projects. Actually, there is a specific line on waters that can help. Well, there are some criteria to have an incremental cost and global benefit, but if parties combine the needs when they prepare their portfolios to get information associated with conservation and sustainable use, could be some opportunities. But the great contribution of CBD through EBSAs is documenting important and relevant sites, and the more we can trust in this information to ensure we can update and to have better and better, this will be this is part of the mission of EBSAs, and I hope we can have the clarity to see the essence and to support a good decision that can allow us to continue with this process. And thank you very much for your participation on this. I hope these messages can pass through delegates and to help us to continue working. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Thank you very much for these very great words. I think it's the final concluding words, and I see. Now I see a hand, and no, thanks. So maybe it's no, the hand is gone. So it was the final concluding words. Thank you, Ezekiel. Excellent. And I don't know, Joe, do you have anything to add?
No, just to note that we will have to then get to work on the report, which will be made available for COP15. And yeah, once again, to thank everyone for their engagement. I think you know, in addition to the great ideas that were brought forward, in my view, it was a really useful opportunity for those who are engaged in the EBSA discussions, you know, both at an expert level and at COP and Substa, to at least have some more understanding of the different views and issues. I think a lot of the value was in people explaining the different views that have been brought forward, and I hope that contributed to a little bit of a mutual understanding of the different positions and views that have been expressed, and hopefully will carry forward to COP. So thank you all for your robust engagement.
Thank you very much, Joe. And of course, it's also to me to thank you all for your valuable contributions. And I also think that your contributions to your post have brought us forward to come up with a sound, robust decision at COP that we can ensure that this process will successfully continue. So once again, thank you very much, and have a great day or great night wherever you are. And I hope to see all of you in Montreal in December to continue our work on this important process. Thank you very much. With that, I close this meeting. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good evening.